Newsmaker Sunday with Fox 10's John Hook.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker Sunday. Pleased to have the Republican candidate, one of two Republican candidates for Secretary of State. The current Secretary of State, Michele Reagan, served many years in the Arizona legislature beginning in the early 2000s.
Yeah, been there a while.
In the House and Senate. And then became in 2014, boy, it seems like a while ago, that we had you and Terry Goddard here debating when you were running back then for Secretary of State. Michele Reagan, our guest. By the way, Steve Gaynor, who is your opponent, he's a businessman. He is your challenger in the GOP primary. We have reached out to the Gaynor folks. We've reached out to Steve Gaynor. We had him booked. He canceled. We tried to get him another time. He has not come on the program. We'd like to have him on the program. And in all fairness, I think the voters deserve that. The only thing I know about Steve Gaynor is what I've seen on the ads. You've debated him 7 times.
We've had several forums in front of women's groups and Republican groups, and then we did the Clean Elections debate on Channel 8. And, you know, we've certainly seen the editorial board, so.
Right. Okay, so let's get right to it. You've obviously had early on a bumpy tenure. It began with the long lines in the presidential preference in March of 2016. When you saw this, what did you think?
Well, when we saw this, we were horrified just like everybody else. This was my first election as Secretary of State, and I asked some staff around 11 o'clock in the morning when our phone lines, we'd already logged thousands of calls, and I had nothing to compare it to. So I asked the staff who had been there longer than me, is this normal? And they said, no.
So you knew there was trouble.
Yeah, and we knew something was drastically wrong, and so we sent people out to the polls to see, was it equipment, was it
and it turned out to be polling places. In other words, you had 200 polling places the cycle before.
Right.
And then because of a low turnout at that time, everybody said, well, maybe we can do with less. And that was Helen Purcell, who was a former Maricopa County recorder. Right.
So Helen's team decided to do vote centers, which are actually a really good idea, doing vote centers. And of course, Adrian Fontes is using them now. It's you can go anywhere to vote. And so
instead of going to your own polling place, you can go to a bunch of satellite.
Correct.
And there were 60 in the presidential preference instead of 200 that they'd had before.
So instead of 200 precinct-based ones, they did these voting centers, and but then they only did 60 of them, and obviously 60 in a year where there were so many people enthusiastic about presidential candidates it just wasn't enough.
Okay, so your response to that, let me show you, because you talked to us after the smoke cleared. Let me play that. This is tape number 2. Take a look.
Ultimately, it is election officials' responsibility, absolutely, and I wish that we had questioned it. I wish I had questioned that 60 were not enough. I did not do that, and for that, I take responsibility.
Do you stand by that? Does that story change looking back?
Absolutely. I mean, when something happens on Election Day or in the run-up to election, the whole election community is in this together. Statewide elections are pulled off with thousands of people on the ground. So, yes, this was a call that a county recorder made. It was approved by the Board of Supervisors. It's not approved by the legislature. But at the end of the day, I'm the one with the fancy title of Chief Election Officer. So we took responsibility in going out and talking to voters, getting their story. I don't know if you remember, we went around and had a series of, you know, let the people come tell us what their experience was so we can give that feedback back to the counties.
That got pretty heated.
Yes.
There were some angry people out there.
There were, and we had to have security there, which was something I had never really dealt with before, but it was important to hear what happened to these folks and then to report back to the counties what we can all do as a community to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Okay, so you get off the launch pad with that election.
Right.
And it kind of marks you right from the get-go, didn't it?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, some of the first ads we saw in this race were, and you know, we knew that was coming, is they showed the clip that you just showed of the long lines and said, don't ever let this happen again, et cetera. You know, there's a lot more people than just Michele Reagan making decisions. And truth be told, I mean, we'll go out there and we'll take the heat with everybody else, but I don't pick polling places. My office doesn't pick them. We don't decide where they're at. The Board of Supervisors is the one that actually approves it.
What would you like the voters to take away from this as they're sizing up candidates here in this Republican primary, you and Steve Gaynor? What would you like to tell them about this?
What I'd like to tell them is, and I think we see this from a lot of elected officials, they get into an office and they don't do anything. They don't make any changes. They don't upgrade. They don't take risk. And the reason why they do that is because when you change systems like we have, we've upgraded almost everything, you're taking an incredible risk because it's not always going to go right. The other option to that is a stale status quo. And to me, that's unacceptable. So, yes, you mentioned my first couple years, they were very bumpy. But the good news is that now we've got election systems and business service systems and employees that the state of Arizona can be really proud of. I mean, we've worked through all that. We've had 4 statewide elections since then that have gone wonderfully, which is why you didn't hear about them.
Well, this is the interesting thing about this job. It kind of reminds me of Homeland Security, which Janet Napolitano went to that job. It is a thankless job, and the only time you're really talked about is when something happens.
It is. I'm sometimes envious of jobs like the Attorney General's or even the Education Superintendent, because you can talk about education, you can get involved with schools, or you can go catch bad guys. The Secretary of State's position is very administrative, so you're right. You don't hear a lot about it when things are going great. We've had a lot of great successes, huge successes, things that are getting national attention.
Give me a couple.
Well, for instance, we're the only state in the country that does scanning and of all of the candidate petitions. And what that means is it's saving you as a taxpayer enormous amounts of money. We don't have to call in 30, 40 temps to sit and count those boxes of signatures. We did a pilot program for a local company. They're probably going to take it nationwide. Those things zip through scanners. John McCain, it was really funny when he came in to file the last time in 2016. He was used to it being an hours long process, and it was 20 minutes. So, you know, he came in, we handed him a sheet of paper, said, this is how many signatures you have, and the rest of the time he used it for a press conference.
So there have been some victories that you want to point to.
Well, you know, when I first took office, our office didn't even accept credit cards. And right now, you could get on your smartphone and file almost anything you need in our business services section online.
Let's go to this publicity pamphlet thing. That was the second one that you got dinged on.
Yeah, that was a May election.
This was the spring 2017 special election ballot measure. This included Prop 123.
It was actually 2016.
Oh, it is 2016. Yeah, you're right.
That was a year we had 4 statewide elections. That had never happened before.
So you were under it. You were under it. Publicity pamphlets did not make it to 200,000 households the spring of 2016.
They did not make it on time.
Right.
They were 8 days late.
This was
doesn't make it any better.
A Secretary of State problem or a vendor problem, which was IBM?
Ultimately, it's my problem when something like that happens, because the vendor and the employee, you know, I don't know who's to blame. We could go back and forth, but at the end of the day, they were both under me. So that was something that we were held accountable for. I'm glad we were held accountable for it, because we ended up with a brand new vendor, a brand new system, and brand new employees. So again, we've had 4 elections since then that we haven't had that issue, so we know the problem's fixed.
When you're out there with voters, are you able to convince them if they have questions and say, hey, well, you know, you had the problems with the pamphlets, you had the problems with the voting lines. Have you been able to get across to them, well, we've had 4 elections since then, everything's better, I've learned, we've learned from our mistakes.
Absolutely.
Are they getting that message? Because all I'm seeing on the air is
well, what you're seeing
what
on the
I
air
see
is
on the air.
what you're seeing on the air are my opponent's ads, which of course are not going to be flattering towards me.
I'm going to run it because I want you to respond to
You
it.
really want to make me watch it?
I want you, because people are seeing this, they're being beat over the head and shoulders with this every night.
Well, $600,000 worth of TV ads is kind of hard to overcome, but yes, when I talk to people, they understand I'm human. I'm going to make mistakes.
Okay, let's
Doesn't
run
make
it.
it right,
This is tape 7. I want you to see the ad. You guys have probably seen it, but I want you to see it, and I want you to, point by point,
Okay.
tell me what you think of it. Go ahead.
Election day fiascos, screw-ups, called incompetent by Arizona's Republican Attorney General. Michele Reagan has failed Arizona for long enough. Meet conservative Republican Steve Gaynor, businessman, outsider, pro-Trump Republican. Steve Gaynor is a lifetime NRA member who spent his career building companies from the ground up. Now he's running for Secretary of State to run the office like a business, protect our elections, and crack down on illegal voting. Steve Gaynor.
You know, he is
a
registered Republican.
When you saw that ad, you knew this was coming, right? But from your own party, you expected this in the general, but I have rarely seen a bloodbath like this in inter-party.
I don't really call it a bloodbath because I'm not doing that back to him, and that may cost me the election, to be honest, but I still, there's certain lines I won't cross. And some of the things in that ad are, and we all know politicians exaggerate in ads, but some of those things are flat out false. So,
which part?
Well, for instance, the Attorney General did not call me incompetent. In fact, if you were to ask the Attorney General, did that ever come out of his mouth? It did not. You know, again, you can take anything and make anyone look really good or bad. I am happy that he used an okay picture of me, though, because sometimes you get those pictures where the people are going.
Oh, yeah, you look like you're in the, you know, you're on the most
that
America's
one could
Most
have been
Wanted.
worse. So
let me play. You talk to us about the voting pamphlet situation when the 200,000 did not reach people on time for the election. You talked to Troy Hayden about it. Let me play that for you and take a look.
We've made a mistake, and we did everything we could to correct that mistake.
For the first time, Arizona Secretary of State Michele Reagan speaks publicly about the problems that led to 400,000 Arizona voters not getting informational pamphlets about Props 123 and 124. She says the problem was with a vendor that handles voter information for the state, and it wasn't intentional.
Certainly not our finest moment. I like to obviously take responsibility for our vendors because we ultimately are the ones that hire the vendors, but this was an error that a vendor made.
I don't know what the right word is to express it, but it pisses me off as an Arizonan and as the Attorney General.
Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovich forcefully said Reagan broke the law by not getting those pamphlets out on time.
It was hard to hear him so angry. Everyone has a right to be angry, absolutely, when another statewide officer doesn't perform as expected. Again, I point out this was something that was not intentional.
Reagan took a lot of criticism for not making the mistake public for over a week after she found out it happened. Her explanation? She didn't have time.
My job wasn't to come and do news shows or to go and do press conferences. My job was to make sure that that election on Tuesday went smoothly.
But don't you see how delaying making it public what this mistake was seemed in a way, to some people anyway, that you were hiding something?
Sure, I could see that. But again, last weekend, my job was very simple in the sense, in my mind, it was make sure that that election on Tuesday goes off without a hitch.
Okay, deserved or not, your opponent has hung this stuff around your neck.
Yes.
What would you want to tell folks about Michele Reagan as Secretary of State and why you believe that you deserve a second term?
The reason why I want a second term is because we've embarked on this wonderful journey of changing and upgrading and the office and making it so that it's user-friendly and transparent. We're getting wild reviews from our customers, and our customers are of voters, candidates, lobbyists, small businesses. That makes the job worthwhile. We've started some things that I want to see through. For instance, lobbyist reporting is still on paper. That's kind of nuts. That should be something that is put online. I'd love to be the one to usher that in. I'd love to be able to work with the legislature to get this primary moved back to where other states do it, not in this
Let me ask you
August
about
heat
that.
of the
Let me
day.
ask you about that for a minute, because it's never made sense to me when people are still on vacation.
It's the worst
They're
possible
trying to get
time.
back to school, all of that. It's a rough time to have a primary in late August.
It is, and in this state it's even worse because it's so hot. And so I will tell you quite bluntly, the reason why is because if it's moved to May or June, which is what most other states do, we have a state law that says legislators in session can't raise money. So any of them that are going to be running, they're prohibited from raising money in those months before.
And you can't move it further back because then you don't have enough time before the general, right?
Correct.
Is that the thinking?
Well, it's just that they go into session in January.
Yeah.
They get out around, April, May, and they need time to fundraise. Or they can change the law and say, which should probably happen, they are allowed to raise money do an exchange if we have real-time reporting,
Let's talk about that when we come back with Michele Reagan, Secretary of State. The test version of seethemoney.com, which was trying to really let people know where money came from in a political campaign. It was supposed to happen earlier. Now it's been pushed back. We're going to talk to you about that and also about Russian hacking. It is very real.
It's very
but
real
not
and
exactly
very
what you think it is. We're back in a moment with Secretary of State Michele Reagan, asking you as a voter for a second term. Back in a moment on Newsmaker Sunday. Back on Newsmaker Sunday with Secretary of State Michele Reagan. Seeking a second term, she was elected to the post in 2014. She served in the Arizona legislature for many years before that, before becoming Secretary of State. Let me ask you about seethemoney.com. This was a campaign promise you ran on. You talked about building a website where the public could track money in political campaigns, and you were hoping for a debut in the summer of 2015 in time for the 2016 election.
Right.
It's still been delayed. Tell me why.
Well, actually, it's up running now. Seethemoney.com is amazing in the sense that it gets wonderful reviews from people who use it. It's only going to get better and better and better with time. We kind of look at See the Money as something where there is no finish line because we'll always be able to add things to it. That's the way it's been built. For instance, I mentioned lobbyist reporting. We would love to have the lobbyists be reporting on this in time.
Let people see where the money's coming
Exactly. So you can pull me up right now or anybody who's running for office and you could see who's given them money, where they're spending their money. You could see that on our old system, to be truthful. That was our old system, which you can also still use. It's just you couldn't do deep dive searches. You couldn't do comparisons between candidates. And here's the real power of See the Money that not a lot of people have caught on to. However, national people have caught on to this. We will be the first state that aggregates all the campaign spending in one portal. What I mean by that is if you're running for mayor of Phoenix, you're filing with the city of Phoenix. If you're running for supervisor, you're filing with Maricopa County.
Right.
91 different cities and towns collecting this information, some of it on paper, 15 counties, and then the state. And if we want to talk about transparency in the state, you need to have one system where it's also, if you pull up John Hook, the big bad lobbyist, you see that.
Well, that's one thing I haven't been called.
Yeah, you've been called a lot, but never that. But you see where some of these people are really trying to influence instead of just the legislature. I mean, it's good to know that,
Right.
but the amount of money being spent in some of these local races is astronomical.
Okay, with the issues you've had early on in your tenure, the Republic comes out. Let me quote here. Reagan has played an important role in the legislature when it was going off the rails. She was a studying, calming influence during the high point of ideological fervor that brought us SB 1070, the hard-nosed immigration bill. Should the day come when Arizona once again calls in its Secretary of State to become governor, Michele Reagan is the most likely to arrive with a political temperament anchored in pragmatism and restraint. They endorsed you.
Yes.
Despite the problems.
Yes.
Were you surprised?
Oh, absolutely. I was surprised. I'm blown away. It was a nice way to start my day, though. So I think that I can't answer for them, but I hope that they got to see the passion for what I do. This is not a stepping stone for me, being Secretary of State so that I could go do something else later. I chose to do this job and want this job because I actually like this stuff. It's hard to like sometimes because in a lot of areas it's very tedious, it's very thankless, but I enjoy it. And maybe they saw that. I also am a very common sense, pragmatic person. People in the legislature would tell you that.
Do you think in a primary, in a Republican primary, you're not cozied up to Donald Trump enough to win? Steve Gainer's talked about being a Trump guy.
Yes, and one of the things that people were concerned with is when I didn't send the voting information to the federal government, when they were asking all states to send all of the voting information. You know, I tried explaining to people why it wasn't proper to do that, and then I finally just started saying this. Since when do conservatives want their names sent to a federal government database? I mean, that just seemed so odd.
You're talking about the voter registration issue?
Correct.
Right.
And so
just to be clear
I know
here,
that's being used
federal
against
law
me.
is that you have to declare that you're a U.S. citizen to vote. I mean, you have to.
Oh, no, I apologize.
Different
I was
matter.
talking about the when the an election integrity commission on the federal level asked all the states just to send their voter files to one.
Quickly on this, because we've got only a little bit of time here. On this issue of registering voters and what they need to, you know, there was a settlement in June of the federal lawsuit. Basically, voters say that they're U.S. citizens, but they don't have to prove it. In Arizona, we passed a law saying, no, we want something more than that.
Absolutely.
Were the voters wrong when they said that? That they want more proof?
Oh, no. In fact, this is a law that Arizona, I'm very proud of this law. It's surprising to most people that there are only 3 states in the entire country that check proof of citizenship. Arizona is one of them.
Do you think there is fraud out there?
Well, there's always going to be the potential for fraud, but our job should be to eliminate that potential. Because think about checking voter registration, making sure that someone's a citizen prior to registration, cuts a lot of things that could happen off before someone even gets a voter registration card. That's why it's a law we're really proud of.
We got to take a quick break. Michele Reagan is our guest. She's the current Secretary of State, running for a 2nd term. When we come back, Russian hacking, how real is it? And the thing we don't talk about, that the Secretary of State is the de facto lieutenant governor. You become the governor, and it's happened 3 times in the last 30 years in Arizona. Back on Newsmaker Sunday in a moment. Back with Secretary of State Michele Reagan, seeking a 2nd term to the job. We haven't talked about it, but Arizona is one of the states that you are really the de facto lieutenant governor. If anything happens to the sitting governor, you become governor. It's happened with Hull. It's happened with Mofford. It happened with Jan Brewer. Do you think we should have a lieutenant governor in this state?
I think it'd be helpful to have a lieutenant governor, or at least change the name of Secretary of State so people really understand what they're voting for.
They're voting for the 2nd person in line, if anything happens, and it's happened a bunch.
I'm actually the highest ranking female in the state, and one of the youngest in the country. So, you know, but it is the 2nd in command, and it's a whole nother job description besides just doing the Secretary of State job. And so I think...
And you are the governor when he's out of state, right?
When he's out of state, I'm what's called acting governor.
Acting
so
governor.
I don't run up to his office and sit in his desk and start making decisions.
Let me ask you...
If we do it right, you never need to know when he's out of town.
Tape number 6. How real is the Russian hacking? We know Russians did try and targeted at least 2 times during 2016 in Arizona. But they were trying to get to personal information, right? They cannot get into our system, correct?
I'm so glad you asked that, because when people hear the words Russian, hacking, and election in the same sentence, it's very nerve-wracking. It's nerve-wracking to us, too. Your actual vote, the machines that count your votes, the machines you may vote on in a polling place, none of those are hooked up to the internet.
You can't get in there.
So Russians aren't going to be able to hack those.
Can they get the central collection of all that?
No, they cannot. Well, I suppose anything can happen, but that would be extremely hard to do. So at the end of a day, at election day, there are cards in the back of those machines. Those cards are removed by hand, driven into the county recorder's office.
It's offline.
2 people are accompanying it at all times.
Couple of seconds left. I want to give you an opportunity. What would you like to say to voters going into the primary, which is August 28th?
Cybersecurity is a very, very important issue. We just touched on it, but cybersecurity of our personal information. It's not uncommon to get thousands of attempts a day on our systems of people just looking for windows to get in. We got to make sure those windows are closed.
They're playing the music. Michele Reagan, thank you, Secretary of State. Good luck in the primary, and the invitation stands for Steve Gaynor. We'll see you next week on Newsmaker.